will take shape. Let's find out when every conversation explores the art of thinking beyond the obvious. And today I have my special guest. One of her advocacy, transforming path through the power of words, discover the story behind the pathway of coach writing, other than Miss Venchele Saint Dic.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Welcome, welcome, Ms. Venchel. And can you please introduce more about yourself that I missed?
Yeah, so my name is Venchele Saint Dic. I am the founder of Pathway Coach Writing, which is a platform helping businesses and individuals use writing as a branding strategy and teaching them how to translate their lived experiences into the written word.
And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world, Ms. Venchel. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And today, let's talk about the transforming path through the power of words. Discover the story behind your coaching. And the main topic that we're going to talk about is the habit formation as it relates to mental health and personal development from the lens of a positive psychology. And it's our aim to give the best of the best information that you will give to us. So, how does a positive psychology approach to habit formation fundamentally differ from a common white knuckling or willpower based model? Is it about building the want instead of fighting that you should not?
I think for me, when people talk about habits in the context of positive psychology versus the white knuckling willpower, they usually, I think, picture gritting their teeth and having more willpower. Positive psychology sort of flips that. So instead of saying, like, how do I force myself, it asks, like, how do I want this more deeply and more freely? I can think about the self determination theory, which is like a big backbone of positive psychology. And it says that our motivation is strongest and most sustainable when it feels autonomous. So when the behavior essentially lines up with our values and sense of self, which makes sense because if you can identify with the said behavior and it aligns with your values, you want to do more of that, rather than being controlled by guilt or pressure. So rather than I shouldn't skip the gym, positive psychology sounds more like I want to move my body because it helps me feel energetic and confident, right? You're identifying the benefits of doing said behavior and how it would make you feel. So the behavior can be the same, but the energy behind it changes. So you go from essentially from tension and self-criticism to alignment and choice. And then over time, that kind of motivation predicts better persistence than trying to white knuckle your way through the way of resistance.
Interesting, Miss Vanchal. Interesting indeed. Many habits are formed to avoid something. How do we pivot to building habits that pull us toward positive vision of ourselves?
I would say that when I was taking the time to reflect on this, I think that a lot of us build habits, to avoid something. So, for example, using my previous example, about going to the gym, but also, not wanting to get sick or not wanting to feel anxious, not wanting to fail. The problem is avoidance motivation is like a fire alarm. It's great for short bursts, but it's exhausting to live with like long term. So, what works better is really turning these habits into an approach towards a positive identity. So, instead of saying, I'm exercising so I don't get heart disease, you flip it by saying I move my body because I'm someone who values vitality and aliveness. So in that sentence alone, you're seeing the value system, right?
Yes.
Included in the sentence. And so again, self-determination theory, shows that when our goals are personally meaningful, when our goals are growth oriented and self-endorsed, not by others, but by ourselves, we stick with them more consistently than when they're driven by guilt or fear. So, a helpful pivot question would be, if I think of one right now, if this habit was an expression of the kind of person that I'm becoming, not just something I'm avoiding, who would that be? So now you're not just running away from guilt. You're actually walking toward a story of yourself that actually feels inspiring. It almost feels like scripting the places or the person you want to be and acting and stepping into that role, right? So tricking your mind to
Hmm.
think that you're already living that life.
Yes, definitely. And tell us, how can identifying and leveraging our signature character strength make habit formation feel more authentic and less like a chore?
So one reason when we talk about character strength, like one reason habits feel like a slog is that we usually copy what other people do and ignore
Hmm.
how we're wired. Like for example, for me, I love to do strength training and do a lot of hit workouts, and I get results from performing these activities. And it may not be the same, for someone else, and based on their body makeup. And so the VR character strength work is really all about identifying your top strength, things like curiosity, kindness, perseverance, spirituality, gratitude, and then building habits through those. So, for example, if one of your top strength is love of learning, your movement habit might be, I listen to a fascinating podcast while I walk. But if your strength is kindness, your habit might be, I send one encouraging text every day. So, turning connection into this natural, daily energizing ritual. And research on character strength has shown that, or seems to suggest that using your signature strength in daily life is linked with greater well being and less depression. So people actually enjoy and stick with those behaviors more. So instead of thinking about it from the perspective of what's the perfect habit, I think we need to start asking ourselves, how can we allow our strength or let our strength do the heavy lifting there?
How do small daily habits directly contribute to the pillars of well being in a Martin Seligman's PERMA model, or positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, accomplishment?
So Martin Seligman's PERMA model says that well-being has five pillars. It's positive emotion. Just breaking down the abbreviation to PERMA. So P stands for positive emotion. The E stands for engagement. The R stands for relationships. M for meaning, and then A for accomplishment. And essentially purports that small habits plug into these pillars, um, can be plugged into these pillars, I should say, directly. So an example, for positive emotion, it could be doing a 2-minute gratitude practice that reliably boosts your positive mood over time. For engagement, it may be doing one flow activity, even 10 minutes of music, journaling, or craft that feeds that sense of um, deep absorption. Then you have for the relationships, it could be a daily check-in text or 5-minute call, that strengthens your connection with your friends, your mentors, your family. For the meaning, it could be a brief reflection like, what did I do today that aligned with my values? It- and that reminds us like how we living our lives and being more intentional and making sure that the way that we live our life is about more than our than looking at it like as a to-do list, right, as a chore. And then accomplishment, could be one example, could be tracking even tiny wins. I walked for 5 minutes, I wrote one paragraph, and that usually trains our brains to notice progress. I know for me, I have a gratitude journal, And I also have a self-esteem jar. Like whenever I get a positive, accolades, or I've accomplished something, like I place it in that jar. I write it down in a piece of paper, and then I place it in the jar. Um, because, just like as I like to think, when people say that it's just a small habit, I like to say that yes, and it might be quietly feeding every pillar of my well-being. And that's what the self-esteem jar does for me. The more that I see that it's being filled up, it boosts my confidence and helps me realize that when the mind wants to say that you're not doing enough, that you're actually doing a whole lot more than you think. And it keeps inventory of your experiences in real time throughout the year. And that feeds into some of the examples that I talked about for the PERMA model.
Miss Venchel, beyond the surface level goal, how do we connect a new habit to deeply how the personal value to fuel our motivation when individually dips?
From my lived experiences, I think that motivation will dip over time, or motivation dips like just across different seasons in our lives, and that's not a character flaw, it's biology. The thing that keeps a habit alive in those moments is not hype, it's meaning. One way to do this is to turn, or at least one way I've done this is to turn a vague goal into a value sentence, then into a concrete plan. So the value would be, I deeply value being present and calm with my family. The habit meaning is that it would be, in this case, or maybe one example could be like, this breathing practice is how I bring that calm version of me into the room. And the plan, an example could be, well, if I park the car after work, then I'll do 3 slow breaths before I go inside. So essentially creating a system, and you creating the atmosphere for you to perform these activities that bring you joy, right? Um, and so literally it's working on implementation intentions. Um, it's, if X happens, then I will do Y plans. That's the formula. And it shows that it dramatically will increase follow through because you're tying a goal to a specific cue. And that makes the behavior more automatic, especially for health habits. So the formula here is, you identify your value, you have a story, then you create a story about who you want to be, and then it turns into this simple if then plan that you can't miss. So that way, when motivation is low, you're not asking, do I feel like it? You're remembering, this is who I'm committed to being.
Ms. Venchel, how does the positive psychology principle of starting absurdly small build self efficacy and create a success cascade that is more important the habit itself?
So the floss one tooth idea sounds silly because we go to our dentist and they always talking to you about the importance of flossing. But psychologically, it's brilliant. I think about Albert Bandura's work on self-efficacy, um, where he talks about like our belief that I can do this, shows that the biggest driver of confidence is mastery experiences, even tiny ones. So each time you succeed, your brain updates, oh, I'm the kind of person who follows through. And starting, small actually does 3 things. When we're talking about self efficacy and success cascades, it really makes the habit almost impossible to fail. Low effort means that your brain doesn't need huge motivation. It also creates a win streak. So as you building small habits, over time it does build also self-efficacy, which predicts better long-term behavior change. And not only that, it opens door to bonus reps. So if you say, I'll just do 1 push-up, and once you're down there you might end up doing 5, right, when you get into it. So the commitment may be tiny, but the upside is big. Because if you do something small from the beginning, your mind, when you start doing it, might want to do more. Um, because we're going back and forth with tying those activities with your value systems and creating long-term behavioral change. So, in longitudinal research on habit formation has shown that consistency over weeks to months, not intensity, is what turns a behavior into something more automatic. So, the real habit at the beginning is you're just going to show up. And then as you get into it, as you do that one rep or that one push up, um, or even with the flossing, the number of minutes or push-ups become secondary.
A secondary indeed. So, Miss Benchall, in a traditional model, the reward is external. How do we design habit loops where the behavior itself becomes intrinsically rewarding, where we learn to find the joy in the process?
I think it's going back to that self-determination theory again. So in old school models, the reward typically is external. If I go to the gym, maybe I'll get to watch my favorite show on Netflix. Positive psychology is more interested in turning the behavior itself into something satisfying. And self determination theory tells us that activities feel intrinsically rewarding when they satisfy three needs. It would be autonomy, I chose to do this, competence, I'm getting better, and then relatedness, I feel connected. So you might ask, how can I make this habit more my style, which satisfies the autonomy portion of this? Another question could be, well, how can I track small improvements so I can actually see my progress? And now you're satisfying the competence criteria. And then the other question could be, when we talk about connectedness and relatedness, can you bring someone else into this? So it may be finding an accountability partner, texting a friend, join a group, share your wins. All of this falls under the category of um, finding ways to relate, to bring this relatedness to the activity that you're doing. And so, in essence, when those needs are met, your brain is not just chasing the end goal, which is to lose, those pounds or shed those pounds, finishing, this book. Instead of focusing on the end goal, you start to enjoy the process. So that's when a habit goes from something I'm forcing myself to do to something I would miss if I stopped doing it.
Hmm. Interesting, Miss Benchall. Interesting indeed. And how can we strategically design our physical and social environments to make a good habit the path of least resistance and bad habits for more difficult one?
I think our environments are silently voting for or against our habits all day. Habit science shows that repetition in a stable context is what burns in um, automation, if you will. So changing the context is often more powerful than changing your mindset. One example I can think of is, when I was trying to shed pounds, I ended up buying bowls that were a lot smaller than what I used to buy, the medium sized ones. And what ended up happening is that over time, you automatically eat less portions, and your mindset automatically changes because you following the path of least resistance. And so even when I'm thinking about some other evidence aligned moves, it does make good habits friction free, just like the example about changing the size of the plate, even, right? Instead of sticking with the medium sized bowls and forcing myself and forcing my mind to have smaller portions of food. So It does make good habits friction free. So, for example, putting your walking shoes by the door, putting a journal on your pillow, um, pre chopping, veggies before you cook something the night before. And then also it adds speed bumps to unhelpful habits. So you might need to turn off autoplay for some of these apps that you have on your phone. You might need to keep snacks out of arm's reach, whether it's in your car or in that cupboard. Or charge your phone outside the bedroom so that uh, you're not addicted to your phone and you're not forced to be using it all the time. And then also it uses another evidence aligned move is it uses social design. So it might be that when we talk about design your environment, you might need to work out with a friend or join a study accountability group, because social norms are rocket fuel for behavior change. And one paper on health habits describes this as making the desired behavior the default option in your environment. So it's actually harder not to do it.
Interesting, Ms. Venchel. And in what ways can foundation of positive habits act as a protective buffer against anxiety and depression?
Think of certain habits like sleep, movement, mindfulness as your personal mental health infrastructure. And the best way to figure this out is by doing an experiment. Like if you have 4 hours of sleep, like how does it affect your mood? How does it affect um, what you need to do for yourself, the next day? And then just again increase the frequency, right? So if it was 4 hours, maybe try to see how you are, after you have 6 hours of sleep, and so on and so forth. Because they don't guarantee, when we're talking about building habits, there's no guarantee that you'll never struggle. It just will raise your baseline resilience. So, for example, when I read some studies, they were saying that there were large meta analyses that showed that physical activity had moderate effects in reducing symptoms of depression and anxiety across different adult populations. There were also trials on mindfulness and meditation that showed a reduction in distress and rumination and increase positive mood. So these habits help regulate stress systems. They do help improve sleep and reduce the kind of repetitive negative thinking that keeps anxiety and depression going. Over time, it does create a buffer because when life does get hard, you have more internal capacity to cope instead of immediately crashing.
And Ms. Venchel, before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people, because my abstract essay is already in fifth season, abstract poetry in second season, and my book 101 review in fifth season too, comedy 101 in second season, and my food 101 in fifth season as well, geography 101, love letters, music 101, and science 101 are fourth season, and sex 101 and Science 101 are in a second season of my baby podcast, Law 101, Mental Health 101, and Bible Verses 101. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcast. So, Miss Banjel, what is the minimum viable habit look like for a mental health maintenance on days when motivation and energy are at their absolute lowest?
It's about really having some self compassion, because most of us think that if I mess up, like I should be hard on myself so I don't do it again. And research seems to prove that it's the opposite, or shows that it's the opposite. Kristen Neff's, for example, work on self compassion, shows that people who respond to their mistakes with kindness, shared humanity, where we all share the same struggle and mindfulness, have noticed that they don't spiral and they have better psychological health, and then they more likely to re-engage with their goals. So neurologically and emotionally, self-criticism ramps up threat responses, whether it's shame, cortisol spikes, avoidance, while self-compassion activates care and soothing systems that help you stay with the discomfort long enough to learn from it. So after missing a day, like a self-compassionate script might be, okay, I may have skipped writing this email today. That's human. What's one tiny way that I can show up again today? And that mindset actually predicts, more persistence than beating yourself up.
Yes, and Miss
And I would just say,
Venchel. Yes, go ahead.
on your lowest days, um, the goal really is not to optimize your life. It really is to keep the flame from going out. So a minimal viable habit is the smallest action that, and you'll need to define what that is for you in your life, because it has to fit your lifestyle that still touches your mental health. Whether it's like one slow intentional breath, standing outside for 60 seconds of daylight, sending one "I'm struggling a bit today" to someone, text to a safe person. Because again, like um, missing a day here or there does not derail the habit formation process. What matters is really returning to it time and time again, and creating those systems in place so that you don't it's easy for your brain and for your mind to process that this is something that's going to be beneficial to you. We talked about Bendua's self-efficacy work earlier on, and it really tells us that even tiny successes build the confidence that we need, to keep going. So your minimum viable habit should be, what is the gentlest, smallest action that will honor your mental health today? And that's enough to keep your identity and your neural pathways alive, in my opinion.
Well, thank you, Miss Venchele Saint Dic, for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. So can you please invite our listeners to support your business, your advocacy, or any projects that you're doing right now?
What are some projects that I'm working on right now? So I would say,
Go ahead, Miss
oh,
Venchele.
okay. I am writing a book chapter for this book, called Confident You Raw Conversations. And so what really inspired the chapter that I contributed to this book is about the loss of my mother because of failures in the healthcare system. And that experience definitely created a wound that I carried quietly for years. The discrimination that she faced, the lack of language support, and the absence of follow up care. Um, and so for me, writing about this chapter, I realized that it wasn't just about revisiting the grief, but it was really about reclaiming my voice. So that moment became the seed for this chapter, where writing is not just an outlet, but a way home to myself. Um, the book itself should be released by the end of December, because I am a co-author with other wonderful women. Um, because it is a collection of real, raw, inspiring stories from women who chose courage over comfort and to tell their stories in this book. And so I hope that you will all have a chance to take a read as the holidays come to a close.
Yes, people, let's support Miss Venchele Saint Dic, because if you support her, for sure, more and more empowering books like this to come. And of course, more empowering coaching to come. So, Miss Venchele, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Monica, people, see you soon.